What's up, RotoViz?
The RotoViz Fantasy Football Show. I'm Dave Caban alongside Curtis Patrick. We are two of the owners here at RotoViz. Just thrilled to be broadcasting live in video, recording the audio. I painted the office/studio over the weekend.
Oh, you did?
The shelving. Yeah, you see that? So I'm pretty pumped to be here.
I see it. The wall's black now. It looks...
It's Inkwell, which is a dark blue.
Oh, God. Okay.
Right. My wife had wanted to redo my shelving so that it wasn't so cluttered. So this is kind of what we came up with. I'm feeling good about this. We have an FFPC stat attack. It looks like you have some bourbon in the glass, Curtis. How are we doing?
Doing great, man. Thanks for holding it down last Thursday or Friday, whenever our third pod was last week. I actually got snowed in at the hospital. So,
wow.
So code gray procedure when we have severe weather, the patients are still in the hospital, right? So yep. I actually had to set up like a makeshift hotel so that up to 70 of our staffers could stay in the hotel so they wouldn't miss shifts. So it's actually really fun operational exercise. It was a bit crazy, but appreciate your understanding and holding it down, still giving the listeners something to pontificate on over the weekend. But it's gonna be great to get into the topics tonight. I do want to give the head nod to the bourbon tonight. I've actually got a bourbonade. Haven't done that since the summer.
Oh wow!
Wanted a little citrus kick in there, so I just got the Buffalo Trace and a little bit of Simply Lemonade going tonight.
Nice. All right, well, Curtis, as I said, we will have an FFPC stat attack in a little bit, but what I wanted to talk about was some early best ball ADP. You mentioned while we were getting things set up here that you've already been on about 20 such early best ball drafts. Obviously a lot of things will settle out with ADP, but I do think it's a worthwhile exercise to kind of explore some of the rounds right now. We're going to kind of do it in a way where we look at a group of 3 players and we decide which one doesn't belong. Typical type of game that I like to do on the show. But are you ready for that, sir?
Yeah, man, I'm more dialed in than I've ever been in February. I'm very ready for this conversation tonight.
All right. So the first players are a group that tends to actually be going in the first 3 picks, and that is Jonathan Taylor, Cooper Kupp, and Christian McCaffrey. So we need to find the one that doesn't belong. You and I have talked now on a number of shows about how we are just not as sure about Christian McCaffrey heading into 2022 as we would like to be. We are huge Cooper Kupp fans. It's impossible to understate what Jonathan Taylor did last year. But Cooper Kupp, man, equally impressive. You go into the player stat explorer, you're going to see that he was number 1 in targets, number 1 in receptions, 1 in receiving yards, 1 in total touchdowns, 6 in air yards, 3 in Whopper, 9 in Racer, 1 in PPR per game, 1 in expected points per game, and 2 in fantasy points over expectation per game. Cooper Kupp, if you look at his graph of wide receiver 1 finishes, it is absurd. Not in only that it's all green, but that there are just so many of these point totals beyond 25 points. If you look at his last 2 seasons, has been a wide receiver 1 in 53% of games. Yeah. I don't think we need to really say much more on this one. I think you have the first 2 picks. I am going to be looking at these guys as opposed to Christian McCaffrey. I think the real question becomes, are there players that you would move ahead of CMC? But I'm going to let you take the floor here. Do you think that's crazy? Or are we on the same page here?
Well, it just comes down to relative value. And then also safety, that it's very hard to win. It's kind of an often used saying. It's hard to win your draft in the first round, but it's so easy to lose it. Sometimes that's within your control and sometimes it's not. I mean, the injuries we can't control, but we can steer away from the positions that are traditionally most often associated with season-ending injuries, which is clearly the running backs in round 1. But at the same time, what is that drop off? Cooper Kupp's historic 2021 is going to be very difficult to repeat. He had positive regression from a touchdown rate perspective, which we predicted. That's why we were on him so heavily this year. He had the initial uptick in production and efficiency due to having better quarterback play with Matthew Stafford. We had the Robert Woods injury, Tyler Higbee with spotty health, running back injuries, all kinds of pieces in the Rams offense. There was instability, but Cooper Kupp was the stable force. When I look at 2022, if Odell Beckham Jr. is back and if Bobby Woods is still around and a healthier version, automatically there's more mouths to feed there. Now, Cooper Kupp could have a 25% reduction in his PPR output and still probably, would have been either the wide receiver one or close to it. So the drop off could be really precipitous, and it would still make sense to take him at the top of round one just because he's a low risk pick. But, who are the other receivers that could take that type of step forward? Where are the other offenses that we could speculate for this type of leap? Not necessarily a 400-point leap like what we saw, but are there players that are poised to take that next jump? And you have to look at rounds 2, 3, and 4, which we're doing today, to understand, those values. So I think it's hard to argue against Jonathan Taylor as the 101. You do that understanding the risk that you're taking. I don't have a problem taking CMC over Cooper Kupp either, just because he showed us even in his limited work in 2021 that he's still capable of the same type of role, and the role would still have similar value. They're trying to retool the offense more again, shuffling up the offensive coordinator situation. They're going to have a new quarterback. The Panthers situation should improve like the Rams did last year. So there's another player that we'll talk about later this week, I'm sure. One of my big exposures in the 4th round so far this year on the Panthers offense that I think makes a lot of sense to invest in. But Taylor and Kupp and CMC, we're aligned in terms of the first 3 picks. I think we're aligned that Jonathan Taylor is the 101. The 1, 2, the 1, 3 in FFPC formats, it should be Kupp and CMC in whichever order you prefer. However, I would also note, the underdog early best ball drafts, also very popular. It's a half PPR format, and you're seeing Derrick Henry in that same area. And because the touchdowns just carry that extra weight, and of course he was on a historic run the first half of the year this year. So I think it's hard to poke holes at the top of the draft. These guys are up there for a reason.
Yeah, and I mean, I can understand, honestly, arguments that anybody would make for any of these players. To some extent, when you start looking in concentrated groups like this, you're kind of splitting hairs. I think you made some good notes there about McCaffrey and how things might change in Carolina. Mm-hmm. So though this exercise might have landed on talking down about CMC, let's keep in mind that we're still saying, he's in the conversation with some of these players. But let's move along here to some players that you're seeing go at the end of round 2. It's an interesting group. Yeah. A.J. Brown, Stefon Diggs, and Darren Waller. So we got 2 wide receivers. You have Waller in at the tight end position, very popular option last year for a lot of teams. Suffered an injury down the stretch, caused him to miss some time. I guess the first question that I'm going to ask here, though, is Diggs. How did you feel about Diggs' season? Because I know that you could kind of look at it as it being a bit of a drop-off from the year before where he absolutely dominated. But I think people might be surprised to see when you actually look at where he finished across a variety of wide receiver metrics, they might be more impressive than you think. He was 5th in targets, 8th in expected points per game, 10th in PPR per game, was actually number 2 in air yards, in 6th in touchdowns. So from my perspective, I think it was a better year than people might be realizing, which, for a player like Diggs with the track record we've seen where he finished last year playing in that young offense that we felt good about with Josh Allen, that might be a pretty attractive spot to get him. But before we talk about Brown and Waller, let's just recap your thoughts on what Diggs did in 2021.
Well, I think as we lean into talking about Diggs, this is a good spot for our FFPC stat attack. And I pulled this from the RotoViz screener. Great place to do research. We spend a lot of time in here, January through April, understanding what happened the year before. And there's a lot of N+1 kind of predictive tools in there as well, that we can use to make good decisions in the upcoming year. So only 3 players, Dave, only 3 players posted 1,100 receiving yards or more in each of the past 3 seasons. Travis Kelsey, which let's just pause there. How
That's
cool is
insane.
it that a tight end is one of these players?
Love it.
Stefon Diggs on
Yep.
2 different teams,
Wow.
and then DJ Moore. So I think a lot of people would have gotten Kelsey, but maybe wouldn't have gotten Diggs and Moore. So that speaks to Diggs's consistency. And again, early in drafts, we don't want to lose. And you still want to have that upside. Now, I think as people think about 2021 for Diggs, yes, if you look at it as positional finishes, okay, you drafted him as a wide receiver 1. He finished as a wide receiver 1. He had a top 6, a top 6 target rate, and, his expected points per game. He was a healthy wide receiver 1. But on a per game basis, he was almost 4 PPR points worse year over year. And that's what people are really feeling. So relative to other receivers, he still performed well, but he just wasn't winning weeks the way that he did the year before. And part of that is the continued breakout of Dawson Knox. Part of it is other players stepping up. We saw Gabriel Davis, Emmanuel Sanders, Cole Beasley at various parts of the season making impacts. Devin Singletary being involved, Josh Allen, running the ball. So, Diggs is sensitive from a touchdown scoring perspective. His expected points, per game, there wasn't as much of a difference as his actual output. It's really the efficiency. It's the efficiency, and that's where it's at. And efficiency can be noisy year to year. It just takes those touchdowns to totally turn it around. 2020, he was wide receiver 7 in fantasy points over expectation. In 2021, he was wide receiver 197. 197. So, that is where all of it comes from. The role is still valuable. He regressed to the negative in 2021. I mean, the likely thing, he's probably going to regress back to the positive somewhere in between in 2022. And I think that makes him a good value, where you have to be careful versus these other players that you've earmarked here with AJ Brown and Darren Waller. I think they are both the most solid bets to lead their teams in receiving touchdowns. Diggs is not. I would say that most people probably feel Dawson Knox is the odds-on favorite, and especially in the FFPC perspective, tight end premium perspective, you have to weigh that with Darren Waller. You have to weigh that with Josh McDaniels coming in and installing a new offense. And then AJ Brown, we saw what he could do even without healthy Julio, without healthy Derrick Henry. He really is that horse. He's more mid-career, still waiting for that big breakout season like we've already seen from Diggs. I would prefer the safety of Diggs's role here in FFPC, where it's full PPR, but on underdog, I actually would lean to AJ Brown over Diggs because of the tight end piece. That's kind of how I see this one. And then, well, I'll pause there. How do you order these players, Dave?
Well, I think for me, it really is coming down between viewing Brown and Diggs as a little bit separate from Waller. And the thing that I want to talk about with Waller here for a minute is, yes, a lot of good numbers for Waller. He was 5th in PPR per game, 3rd in expected points last year among tight ends. Even missing time was still 7 in overall targets. But one thing that I find a little troubling, Curtis, is for a player that you're taking in the 2nd round at the tight end position, there needs to be a lot of separation between them and other players. If you look through his game log last year, there was only a couple of games where he really distanced himself from other tight end ones. Came out of the gates firing, put up almost 27 points against Baltimore. Other than that, though, 15 points against the Chargers, 16 points against the Giants, 19 against Cincinnati. Other games, he was down in that range where you would expect a tight end 1 to score. So if I'm using a 2nd round pick, I'm not sure that I'm getting that delta between him and the opportunity cost of going away from a player that could score more points at a different position. So to me, I'm going to say that Waller's actually kind of the odd man out. And yes, McDaniels is going in there, but I think and he probably is the most likely to score the most touchdowns, to draw the most targets. But I don't think we're going to see this turnaround where you can project getting enough of a distance between him and there's a lot of other tight ends I would rather have. Well, I shouldn't say a lot, but there's other tight ends in that zone I would rather have.
Yeah, I think I think that's fair. I think, Pitts is probably going to end up settling, half a round, maybe even to a full round above Waller and tight end premium. I can tell you in the half PPR, which obviously is a totally different tight end scoring dynamic and interpositional value. You have to weight a lot differently when you're just going straight half PPR and not giving tight ends the bonus. But Pitts versus Kittle versus Waller does have a little bit of a different feel on underdog than it has on FFPC, both against each other and then both as well against other positions. And I will say, I mean, when I'm pulling up Waller in our NFL Stat Explorer, and let me share this. I'll try to see if I can share this on the fly
Nice.
For those following along. It's going to take a second. I'll get there. Here we go. You look at our NFL Stat Explorer. I'm going back to 2019. So Waller EP per game, positionally, tight end 7, third in targets, second in receptions. You go to 2020 here, tight end 2 in EP per game, first in targets. Go to 2021. Of course, it was a shortened season for him, just 11 games this past year, but he's still EP, tight end 3 in EP per game. And so the role's been very, very solid year over year over year, with him being Carr's trusted target. And it's just, I think it would be interesting had he been healthy this entire year, had the team not had to kind of pivot on the fly from, Henry Ruggs being an important piece of the offense to finding, who are those other wide receivers that can contribute. It was a weird season. It was just a weird season. And so there's context behind it that I can kind of live with. So I wouldn't fault anyone for taking Waller. I will say that I've been taking him when he falls past this group, because he does it enough that you can still end up with your exposure. So he's probably not worth planting a flag on there, to your points.
Yeah, and I think that's a good way of framing it, right? Especially in the context of the conversation we're having. I probably should have mentioned that doesn't mean that these are guys that you're avoiding. It's simply talking about, at that spot in the draft, who we would rather have, and in the confines of portfolio, the players we'd rather have the most exposure to. And I also think that you do make a good point, because it is possible if we got to see Waller play the full complement of games, maybe we would have had more of those boom weeks, and I'd be looking at him in a slightly different lens. But unless you have anything else to say there, let's move along.
No, let's go to round 3.
All right. This is an interesting group of players, man. I think this is the most interesting. Sandwiched in what I would call the late middle of round 3, you have Keenan Allen, J.K. Dobbins, and Jaylen Waddle. So an aging receiver at this point, a running back that had some success early on, missed a full season, and then a rookie wide receiver that I have just been gushing over. This one, I think, is really hard to tease out. That to the point I almost want to make a case that maybe Waddle shouldn't even be in there and he should be up higher, but I don't think I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
Because that's a tough one to sell. So it looks though like you already might have some thoughts on this, so I'm going to let you take the floor.
Well, yeah, just I just don't like Dobbins in this group. Mm-hmm. I don't like Dobbins in the group. We're talking about a situation where even if he comes back fully healthy, Lamar Jackson is still there. The offense is not changing, and Gus Edwards could be back, or the team, could invest in. I think the scary part for me is listening to Ravens camp in January talking about, hey, we expect these guys. The quote was something like, "We expect these guys to be able to contribute." They're talking about Edwards and Dobbins both at some point in 2022, but we're also evaluating how to strengthen the room. I mean, I don't know if they would take a day 2 running back, but I could see an early day 3. You got to supplement. You got to. I mean, if you're playing the odds, maybe one of these guys doesn't come back and look like he did before their injury. Mm-hmm. And so, and again, even if they're full strength, it's the same thing as the Buffalo situation. Like you're just that the quarterback it makes it noisy, man. And there's not enough receiving work or a reason to believe in a change in the receiving opportunity for these running backs. It just feels really risky. I mean, especially at this early point in the season, I would so much rather wait 2 to 3 rounds and roll the dice on a rookie. Even though I don't know the situation that they're rolling to, I love the idea of Keenan Allen or Jaylen Waddle here, and then wait till round 5 and take Breece Hall, or wait until round 6 or 7 and take Isaiah Spiller or Kenneth Walker. I mean, I would much rather bet on that. And one of them landing in a situation where, they can get into, or Rashad Penny in round 8, round 9. I mean, there's just, not to derail there, but, and then if we look at these 2 receivers, okay, so let's throw Dobbins out. Let's say he doesn't make any sense. Yep. Well, Keenan Allen, I mean, he's been remarkably consistent, 5 straight wide receiver 1 finishes and season long counting stats. And then the team is going to be probably moving on from Mike Williams and getting another player involved in the offense. What will that look like? What will that ramp up look like? I think Keenan Allen could be better in 2022 than he was in 2021. And he was the wide receiver 9 with 257 PPR, sixth in EP per game at the wide receiver position. So I think he's a huge value pick at the end of the 3rd, very safe pick. And then Waddle, new offensive regime coming in with Mike McDaniel from the 49ers coming over, an offense that could now that we know who the guy's going to be, this is the run game designer for the 49ers and for Kyle Shanahan for, the last several years of his career. I think the Dolphins offense is undergoing a transition. And we like Waddle for dynasty. We like him even for redraft. Man, I feel like you're kind of pricing in the upside to take Waddle over Allen, but I do think this is a fair spot to take Waddle. That's how I would break this down.
Yeah, I mean, unsurprisingly, we're pretty much in lock on that take there. I don't need to talk about Waddle anymore. Everybody knows I have loved Waddle. I still do. I think the reasons that you are dismissing Dobbins from that group hold. I do not want to be taking a running back in that type of situation this early on in the draft. And I think the other thing is, for as good as Dobbins could be, this is just the type of situation where I really feel like the upside, even in a smash season for him, does not get to where it needs to be for me to go running back this early on. Right.
For sure.
So that's the huge thing that immediately took him out of the, running for me there. The other thing that I'll say is, Keenan Allen, ton of sustained success. The other thing is he's been in the league a long time now, still only 29, right? Does turn 30 in April, but I think that with the way that his game functions, there's no reason that we need to start having concerns about him, losing a step, being phased out, especially with the way that things are going to run in that offense with Justin Herbert, Mike Williams likely departing, as you said, unless, of course, the team does this year what it should have done last year, which was make Jared Cook a priority.
All right. And with that, let's go to late round 4, early round 5 take.
Okay. All right. So this group of players it's another fun one. As you start getting further in, there's definitely more of a variance between where you'll see these players going in terms of ADP in some drafts. But we have Travis Etienne, Terry McLaurin, and Amari Cooper. Etienne, still yet to play in the NFL, so we don't really know what that's going to look like. So many questions in Jacksonville's offense. Then Amari Cooper, I want to just talk about here quickly. Some of the numbers for him coming off of this past season. We see Cooper with just 3 wide receiver 1 games. In fact, Curtis, only 4 games with over 15 points, 32 among wide receivers and targets, 30 in receptions, 30 in receiving yards, 16 in total touchdowns, just 33 in expected points per game, 51 in fantasy points over expectation per game. Actually only finished as the wide receiver 30 in PPR scoring. Now, you still have a group of young, talented players to compete with in Dallas. You still have Dak there. I don't think that the situation really changes that much. So, I'm not really in love with any of the options here. I almost might end up going McLaurin by default. But I don't have any strong feelings about this. So as I'm working through this, why don't you take the floor for a minute? I'll see if it can push me in one direction.
Okay, well, I kind of want to go off the board here and say that I just think there's better options that might have an ADP about a half a round later.
Okay.
So, but breaking that down a little bit, I think Etienne is an irresponsible pick in this range.
It is. Yeah.
So James Robinson's still there. It's a midfoot injury. I'm out, man. This is too expensive. Like, Etienne should be a round 9, round 10 pick right now. Like, his ADP should be below the top 1 to 3 rookie running backs. That's where his ADP belongs. I just can't draft at your own risk in this range. I'll have 0 until his ADP corrects. Which will happen after the rookies have draft capital assigned and landing spots. Those guys will get pushed up the board. And it's, I think Etienne's going to undergo the journey kind of like the Chase Edmonds ADP journey from last year, where everyone was super enthused and he was round 4 early in the year. And then he ended up in round 8 or 9 where he belonged by the end of the draft season. So, but then with these receivers, so there are ways that you can see that they each win. You can see McLaurin getting an upgrade at quarterback. That wouldn't take much. But if the team does draft a rookie and that rookie doesn't look great or isn't ready right away, then, we're just getting more Taylor Heineke. We saw what that looked like this year. McLaurin literally only had like 3 usable weeks. McLaurin murdered your team this year, unfortunately. And that has nothing to do with his ability. He was still making highlight plays. They just could not get him the ball. And his year-end stats aren't even that bad. It's just they all came during certain blow-up weeks. And again, he tanked your team. You were counting on borderline wide receiver 1 return from him, and you were starting him with confidence every week and just whiffing. And Cooper wasn't much better. Cowboys offense just really weird this year. But again, there's a non-zero chance that Cooper moves on. So there might be different ways that, I think Cooper is a less risky pick than McLaurin because you would expect his situation in Dallas to improve if he stays, because Michael Gallup is almost certainly gone.
I was about to say, I forgot to mention that.
So Gallup is almost certainly gone, or Cooper goes to another team that doesn't have another receiver as good as CeeDee Lamb.
And actually, the other thing too is Dalton Schultz. It will be likely gone. Of course, Blake Jarwin will still be there, but taking away one piece of that equation and potentially alongside with Gallup, I think those are good points.
Yeah, so we could see a pretty easy path to Cooper going back to pre-2021 production in Dallas. So I think he's a better pick than McLaurin. Of the 3 that you outlined, I would take him. But I think there's other guys in this range that also make some sense. If you want to take your first a different running back in this range, potentially, Elijah Mitchell falls to this range. Josh Jacobs is in this range. Ezekiel Elliott is in this range. I'm not necessarily saying that those guys are ones that I want to be overexposed on, but I think they're probably better picks than Etienne, all things considered, especially if you started wide receiver in rounds 1 through 3 or rounds 1 through 4. So if you want to wait until after that 4 or 5 turn in particular, Michael Pittman was more consistent than either of the receivers that you outlined previously. Could be really set up for a year 3 leap into that next stratosphere, finishing as a wide receiver 2 this year. But unlike the other guys, he actually sprinkled in some wide receiver 2 weeks, and even some of his wide receiver 3 weeks, he's still scoring 13, 14, 15 PPR. And so I think his role, maybe he has a higher floor than neither of those guys had, but also still has maybe some ceiling that hasn't been achieved. And then I like, playing Elijah Moore as a year 2 breakout candidate in this range as well. He's going in that area. So there's just other options that are probably more exciting. The Amari versus McLaurin debate, it feels like one we're going to end up having with Sean and Blair when we do our high stakes drafts this year. Like these feel like players that at least if we were doing those drafts right now, without all the extra information we'll have by the summer, that would, be fades to those guys and in favor of the younger receivers.
Yeah, that definitely does feel like the type of debate that we'll be having soon.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think that normally I try to hold us within the question asked. This time I am going to let us go away and say that, perhaps we might be looking elsewhere. The case you make for Cooper does make sense. But yeah, not really too jazzed up about any of them. Maybe that could change as we get some more information. We watch things happen, in free agency and the draft. Yep.
I'll tell you what I've been doing. What I've been doing is you just take Breece Hall followed by like Marquise Brown or Darnell Mooney or Brandon Cooks or OBJ even there, and just be a half round early on guys because you like those situations so much better. Like you don't need to be a complete lemming to ADP, after you get past the first 2 rounds or so of the draft.
Right. So real quick, because we're coming up on the amount of time that I want these episodes to be this time of year, but we actually have not talked about rookies really or the incoming class at all. Can you give just like a 1-minute description of Breece Hall? Because there might be some people questioning why you're tossing out Breece Hall here.
Oh, yeah, sure. So I think Breece Hall is the odds-on favorite to be the RB1 off the board. He's probably not going to get drafted on day 1, but he should be drafted on early day 2. He's got requisite size. He's very productive at Iowa State. This is the same program David Montgomery came from. Very, very productive. You're talking like a 20 touchdown guy, 1,500, 1,800 yards from scrimmage. Running back production and running back touches at the college level tend to get running back touches and running back production at the NFL level. You can also see some other metrics that we like to scout running backs in our RotoViz fantasy football rookie draft guide. Dave always writes up our breakaway rush score stuff for the guide, and Blair also has some running back detail that he offers in there. And then beyond him, a couple guys just to keep your eyes on that probably get that day 2 draft capital and roles that should be as good or better than you would figure for Dobbins and Etienne, 2 guys that we're talking about that we didn't like at ADP today. Isaiah Spiller, he's out of Texas A&M, 215-pounder, very well-rounded skill set. And then also Kenneth Walker, late bloomer at Michigan State, but had an incredible workload here in 2021. Late riser in the process, but also, figures to get at minimum round 3 draft capital. So those 3 guys are really the 3 that I think warrant, single digit round consideration. And I think all 3 of them are picks better spent than the 2 guys we broke down tonight.
100%. Perfect note to leave the show on. We will see you back tomorrow. Thank you for listening to the RotoViz Fantasy Football Show. Send us questions at rvffshow@gmail.com. Follow us on Twitter at DaveCabanFF and at CPatrickNFL. Leave us a voicemail at 978-615-9214 and make sure to rate, review, and subscribe.